with the good news coming out of Pakistan recently. The story goes that God himself showed up at the White House and wanted to congratulate the American president for his tremendous feat. And he says, President Obama, your first 2 years have left some to be desired by many accounts, but you've done a tremendous thing here. So I'm going to grant you one wish, whatever you want, to better the state of the world. Go ahead and pick it. So the president thinks and he says, well, God, I would like you to help me resolve the Israeli-Palestinian issue. That would be a tremendous thing. And God says, it's complicated. I mean, Hamas and Fatah have now signed a temporary agreement, but you have the settlements, you have disputed land, they want to destroy Israel. I mean, it's very, very complicated. Mr. President, you're going to have to pick another one. Give me a pass on that. Even God, for me, that's a tall order. So Obama thinks and he says, well, how about a free, democratic, and reconstructed Cuba? God thinks, let me see that map of Palestine again. All right. I have to keep up with Andy on the humor. As the only attorney here among all these engineers, I'm a little bit nervous, but so bear with me. I was asked to speak on the legal aspects of infrastructure redevelopment. And obviously, the legal aspect of that is as important as any of the other aspects. The restoration of the rule of law to a future Cuba is vital and really a precondition for the reconstruction of infrastructure. The infrastructure field is not exempt from the same exigencies that will require Cuba to restore a predictable, stable rule of law that will incentivize the massive new investment that will be necessary to reverse half a century of totalitarian darkness in the infrastructure field as well as all the other fields. This will be a challenge, and not only do you need to attract that investment, but then you need to set up a level playing field that will encourage competition, will discourage illegal or unethical behavior, and will allow market forces to play a positive role in this reconstruction. One of the key, perhaps the key underpinning of this type of structure, some of you have heard me speak about this before, is property rights. It will be impossible, for example, to build roads, to build dams, to build bridges, to restore structures unless there is a workable system of property rights. And that has to, restitution of property rights and reversal of the systematic confiscations that occurred half a century ago has to be across the board. It can't only be for American companies. It can't only be for foreign companies. It can't even be for Cuban exiles. It has to be for all property owners, including the millions that remain behind on the island, which are the largest group of them. When you think about the extent of infrastructure development, you need to think about not only plattings, rights of ways, reservations, easements for the construction of roads, highways, aqueducts, sewer systems, sanitation systems, power plants, telecommunications and internet facilities, fiber optic cables, data storage, maritime ports, inland ports, airports, railways, all of the attendant support structures. All of this has to be built, leased, auctioned off, bid for. It's a tremendous undertaking. And there no doubt will be a role for public-private partnerships to magnify the scarce amount of resources and allow the Cuban government to work with the private sector to hasten the development of this infrastructure system as quickly and as effectively as possible. The Cuban government throughout the past several decades has embarked on all kinds of, many would say, pseudo-scientific experiments. Rivers have been dammed, areas have been flooded, often without any scientific basis. But this creates materially altered properties that then you have to deal with. How do you, if you can't restitute those properties to their legitimate owners because they've been materially altered, i.e. flooded, et cetera, you're going to have to compensate them, find other properties to substitute for them in order to restore the rule of law in those areas. For example, the Zaza River, which is second only to Cuba's Rio Cauto, has been dammed up, mostly to provide enjoyment for Italian tourists to duck hunt, for example. You know, that was taken from, dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of property owners in that area. Environmental damage, when you think about the salinization of coastal areas that have occurred because of overpumping of the water from the aquifer, the nickel pollution, like in the Moa Bay area, contamination of those areas, estuary and coastal areas, the dumping of raw sewage and contaminants into salt and freshwater bodies. You have Havana Harbor, you have Matanzas Bay, you have the byproduct of alcohol distillation. All of these things have caused enormous environmental havoc, which will have to be resolved quickly, respecting property rights for health reasons, and incorporating the private sector in that process. Obviously, Cuba, sort of foreign to most of us that were lawyers that were trained here in the Anglo-Sajon common law system, Cuba obviously is going to follow, because of its tradition and history, correctly, it's going to follow a Spanish civil law based system, and we attorneys are going to have to learn that system if we're ever to play a part in that legal system. But obviously, I'm borrowing a little bit from what I have learned here, since my training is here, not in a civil law system. Cuba's culture of administrative corruption, which predates the Castro Revolution, has to be broken, has to be reversed. And this will, the government regulatory structure that is set up will help to do this. We have to have competitive bidding. We can't have, sole source, amiguismo, socialismo types of awards of big public projects. There has to be a transparent and intelligible regulatory framework. There has to be something akin to our sunshine law, which allows the public to witness the inner workings of government, which are not always pretty. What did Bismarck say about sausage making and legislation? Or the end product is sometimes good, but the process is ugly along the way. Public records laws are obviously subject to certain exceptions, attorney-client privilege, etc. Those types of reforms have to be implemented in a system consistent with Cuba's civil law background. So, in conclusion, Jerry's favorite words, in conclusion, the legal aspects of incentivizing and regulating the development and redevelopment of Cuba's varied infrastructure needs as a crucial element to its transition to democracy must be carefully considered by policymakers and be essentially based upon the transcendent principles of stability, predictability, market incentives, transparency, property rights, and effective limited government. I hope you have some good questions for me later. Thank you very much.